Okay, well, you've got two for the price of one this evening. You've got me and you've got Evie. Most people would actually prefer to speak to Evie, so that's a bonus that you've got her there. So hi everyone, thanks for joining us. My name's Katie Edwards. I'm a writer, a freelance writer. Until 2020, I was an academic in arts and humanities. So I did worked in the School of English and did that for like 20 odd years. And then I became part of the Great Resignation in the first pandemic in 2020, when I decided I was going to go freelance. So it's been a bit of a baptism of fire, actually, going freelance. So I'm going to try and share with you the things that I learned when I decided to go it alone. So I mainly write op-eds for newspapers. I'm also a book writer. I've got a book coming out. So I've got a bit of a portfolio kind of career going on, which I think if you're planning to be a freelance writer, I think it's a good idea to develop that. It's a good idea to get like more than one string to your bow, because there will be times when, you know, you might not get the commissions you think, and it might be that, you know, you hit a really nice spot and you seem to have got loads of commissions, and then all of a sudden it might dry up for a couple of weeks. So you do need to be prepared for that kind of feast or famine context. So I'll just on. Oh, it's gone backwards. So to start off with, we'll talk about ideas and how you get ideas and inspiration. Now, first of all, ideas are everywhere, and I find that I get most ideas when I'm in the shower, which is quite annoying. And I've had to buy, you know, one of those like waterproof notebooks for in the shower that you stick on the wall, you stick on the tiles, because so many times I've either woken up in the middle of the night and I've had this idea that's been so clear, and then I thought, there's no way I'm going to forget that. No chance. That's so clear to me. And then in the morning, I cannot remember it for the life of me. And the same thing happens when I'm in the shower. So I've just started putting that up there to write ideas. The best thing to do to get your brain working in that way, in generating ideas, is to read the news. Now, I know that sounds obvious, but what most people don't do is read the news from all perspectives. So, you know, I do, you know, I'm not a kind of natural Daily Mail reader, but I do read the Daily Mail. I read the Sun, I read everything. So that's the first thing that I do as soon as I wake up in the morning, is have a look through all the different publications, because that's the thing, you know, it's all very well just having you one, you know, publication that you're loyal to, but that doesn't often generate new ideas. And sometimes it can also kind of limit your voice a little bit. So it's a great idea to try and, you know, be as open as you can to all different types of news. You don't have to agree with them, obviously, but just read them. Also, keep up to date with social media, which personally I found a bit of a chore, to be honest, because I'm not a natural social media user. And sometimes I actually find it really quite particularly Twitter, I find it quite a difficult context. It's a bit headachy for me. But I tried to come off Twitter for a while and found that that's just not going to work. A lot of the stories that don't make it to mainstream press are on Twitter. So if you are looking for something new that not everybody else is writing about, which is what you need to do really, if you're looking to do opinion pieces, then you need to keep an eye on what's happening. So an easy way of doing it is to keep an eye on what's trending. So, you know, look at what's trending for you, but look at news, look at entertainment, and see what's happening. And be nosy as well. So I have got ideas while I've been on trains. So I know Jem's on a train right now. Just kind of, this says a lot more about me than I meant to give away, but you know, that is the story of my life. I will listen to people who are on the phone behind me, for example, and be like, oh, I wonder what's happening next. Oh, and that sometimes will generate an idea for a story. The other thing that's really important is on social media, find the commissioning editors and follow them, because they will often be posting stories. They'll often post the stories that they're commissioning. And if they've got any like commissions that they want to do that they haven't yet done, they'll put them on there. And so sometimes you get an idea what they're looking for from their requests. You can also follow the hashtag journo request as well, and that will sometimes give you an idea of stories. Usually that's kind of asking for people to, give quotes or comments or asking for expert comments, but it also does sometimes include people who want to commission. The commissioning editor role seems to be quite fluid. There are quite a lot of changes in that, so people move on quite quickly. So you also need to make sure that you're following the current commissioning editor as well. So you need to kind of keep an eye on where there are changes. And that's also useful because when new people begin a role, they often will start off by putting out a tweet and saying, delighted to say I'm joining such and such. Pitch me. I want your best ideas on such and such, such and such, such and such, and and then it'll have their email address. And that way, you know what kind of thing they're looking for, but also you've got their personal email address, which is very useful because rather than using, the generic one, I think if anybody's tried to pitch to Guardian, you'll be directed to opinions@guardian.com or whatever it is. It's always useful to kind of get into somebody's personal email inbox. Now, they're still going to get hundreds and hundreds of pictures. So it's not like you're going to, you've got some sort of exclusive by getting their email address, but it does help kind of cut it down a little bit. So with ideas, that's pretty much every night. I think up at least 2 ideas, and then I put them into pictures that night. And then I do, on your email where you can schedule send, I schedule send for 7:30 the next morning, so that those pictures can go out and be in the email inbox of the editors before they go into their editorial meetings. In terms of pitching the op-eds, what I have done is I've made a spreadsheet of publications, and I've put names of editors and addresses. And I know that Journo Resources has got a really brilliant section where you can look at all the different publications. But it's also really helpful to have like the current commissioning editor next to that and the email addresses. The thing about that is you do have to update it regularly because, like I say, commissioning editors move on. There's quite a lot of movement. But that way I can see where I'm pitching, what I've pitched to them. And if for example, I'm pitching, if I'm just pitching to, like 2, for example, 2 publications, I can see that, and then I can make sure that I'm pitching more widely. Because it's really easy to kind of get a couple of pet publications because, you might get on with the editor, or, your point of view particularly chimes with them or something like that. And it's good, but it can be problematic because if you limit yourself to a particular publication as a freelancer, and then that commission editor moves on and a new one comes in, you might just be out of commissions then. So you need to make sure that you're kind of juggling. In your pitch, you need to make clear, sorry, I'm just going to cut you down. In your pitch, you need to make clear, why should you be writing this? Why are you the person? And that's either because you've got expertise in it, it's because you know about it for some reason, it's like your hobby or you've experienced it or whatever, or it could be that it's a personal story. Whatever it is, you need to tell them because you need that hook. There needs to be a reason. Otherwise, if it's just people gobbing off in a newspaper, then everybody will be doing op-eds. So there needs to be a reason why you are doing it. You need to be very clear on what your angle is. And in fact, the editor, if they send, it might be that you get to know the editor well, and then they start to send you ideas and say, would you like to write on this? And you say, yeah, that's great. And then they'll say, what's your angle? So, op-eds are by nature like one-sided, that they're an opinion. It's about having a strong opinion and putting that forward. They're supposed to be there to create conversation. They're supposed to be there to show, a whole, different perspectives. And so you'll need to know what your argument is. It's not like a kind of, like a kind of GCSE essay where you're like, there's this side and there's this side, and actually both are equally valid. It's like, look, this is what my perspective is, and this is why, and here's the evidence for it. Keep your pitches very short, because they've, like I say, editors have got, 1,000,000,001 coming into their inbox. And so within that 250 words, you've got to, writing pitches, it's a bit of it's a skill, and it's something that you get better at. So they might take you a while at first, because even though it sounds short, actually writing 250 words, where in that you've got to say why you're the right person to write it. You've got to include a link to your portfolio, and then you've got to say what you want to write about and what your angle is. It's actually not that much. Make sure that you send them by 7:45 a.m. That's not always the case. If it's breaking news, then you want to send it as soon as you've seen it, because otherwise, if you even wait 10 minutes, it's already, somebody's got it already. But if it's something, that's not, like, for example, when the death of the Queen, you needed to be like on that straight away. If it's something else, that's a kind of longer lasting story, then you can send it by 7:45 a.m. The reason for that is that editors often have their meetings, their editorial meetings in the morning, sometimes like 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning, where they decide what they're going to commission. So your pitch needs to be in the bag for consideration at that point. I've sent pitches after that, and editors have written back to me and said, I'm really sorry, we've already commissioned this, but, we liked your angle. So actually, it's nice of them to respond, because they don't always, but that's also annoying, because it means that if I'd, sorted myself out a bit more, I would have got the commission, but I didn't. Be aware of time limitations. If you're sending something that's timely, like something that's happened that day or going to happen that day, then they're going to want to publish it. Probably they're going to want you to have submitted it by 2 p.m. at the latest. So it might be that you send something in by 7:45, they might tell you at 10 or 11 that they want it, and they might need you to submit it for 2 p.m. So you might have 3 or 4 hours to write something. So that's why you've got to, first of all, make sure that you are the right person to be writing it, because obviously you've got to know a subject pretty well to write something persuasive and snappy in that time. But also you've got to make sure you're free to do it. So if you know that you can't write anything on that particular day, or there's hardly any time, then don't pitch that particular day, because you're going to get yourself into a bit of a tangle. And also, if you're pitching something, then you want to show editors that you're reliable, and you want to show editors that you can deliver the goods. And so you don't want to pitch something and then say, actually, I can't deliver it, or worse, get to the deadline and say, actually, I can't do it. It might be, if you've sent something out to more than one outlet, you might be accepted by 2 or 3 or even more, and that's brilliant. But you're now going to have to rethink your angle, because you can't sell the same pitch to more than one place. They want an exclusive, they want something that hasn't been written about. So for example, I wrote about, do you remember the Queen Barbie, when they did like a Barbie version doll of the Queen? And I wrote about that and I pitched it to 2 different publications, and then both publications accepted. But I had to say to the second publication, I've already sold this, so but I can sell, I can do still on this theme, but on a different angle. And then they asked me, what's your angle? So I wrote back, and they said, this is great, just make sure it's nothing like the first piece. So you can't sort of recycle it. You can't say, okay, I'm gonna write different words, but it'll still have the same approach or same angle. It can't be. It's got to be completely different. So that's also something to be mindful of. It also meant that I've got about 45 minutes to write each piece and get them in. So again, you've got to make sure that you know your subject, and you've got to make sure that you've got the time to write it if you're commissioned. I don't have to say this, I'm sure, but we all get stuff that's a bit rude, even if it's unintentional. We all get stuff that's a bit, brusque or a bit irritable. Always be polite, always be timely, and don't expect to receive responses, because, editors are busy, and they are getting hundreds of pictures a day from loads of different writers. New writers are starting all the time, so they often just don't have time to respond. And if they respond to say that, sorry, we can't commission, that's really polite and kind of them. So, you might want to respond and say, thanks very much for letting me know. I know that sounds really basic. I'm sure most of you are far more, you're far nicer than I am, but it helps to just remember that, they're humans and they've got a billion different things happening like the rest of us. Which comes on to building relationships with editors. Now, I would say that what you need to do if you're becoming a writer, I'm sure you do this already, is you need to build relationships with other writers as well as editors. It's a really competitive arena, there's no doubt about it. I mean, of course, you're all pitching on the similar things every day, but it's not a competition. So, you can all, it's possible to all make a living and support each other without, seeing other writers as opposition. In order to be competitive, it's a good idea to get a personal website so that all your stuff is put in one place, and somebody can see really quickly what experience you've got. They can see what kind of, what your beat is, so they can see what kind of themes you write on. They can see examples of your writing, and they can get a feel for you and that, your kind of brand, if you like. I always kind of build, and so my portfolio is on my website. But again, you need to update that regularly, because there's nothing more off-putting than going to somebody's website and seeing that, it was last updated in like June 2021. Try and make sure it's current and it's showing what you've done. If you haven't got a portfolio, so if you haven't got something where you've written for like national press or whatever, create one, make your own. So for what I did was, for every story that kind of got away, so for every story that I didn't get commissioned, if I felt strongly about it, then I'd write a story on it anyway, and I'd write it and put it on Medium or Substack. And that way, you've got kind of publications that people can read and that you can direct people to, that are on current events and they're on the themes that you write on. But it doesn't matter if they haven't been commissioned, because you've done it. And it's also, some people have really created a good kind of readership through Substack and Medium as well. And it's also a good way of, getting to know other writers. And it's a good way of also, kind of honing your writing. The thing is, with Medium and Substack, you aren't limited to the same kind of, you don't have to worry about, the word count. So usually op-eds are they're really quite short on the word count. So, you might have 600 to 800 words to write something. Whereas on Medium and Substack, you can really get into it and you can really, show your knowledge on it. I had an article had a piece on Katie Price, for example, that I put on Medium and Substack, and that did reasonably well on there. And actually, I got another couple of commissions off the back of writing that one. So don't think, if you don't get commissioned, don't bin the pitch and don't go, oh, it's rubbish. Just do it anyway if you've got the time, because it's a good way of building a portfolio. Muck rack, if you don't have your own personal website, and or you've not got time to put a portfolio together on a website, to curate one, you can do that on Muck rack, which will have your kind of it's got your profile, and you can change your you can highlight particular stories that you want to publicize, or you want people to see. You can put your contact details on it, and that's quite helpful. I know that other writers don't have a personal website and they use Muck rack as their kind of shop window. In terms of like editors and writers, congratulate them on good stories and publications, or something that something that you've seen that they've been doing. So keep up with their work, and say, I really like that story that you wrote, and I thought that was a really incisive interview, or whatever. Because it's a two-way thing. It's not just you pitching to them and getting picked up by them. It's also showing that you read their work, you're interested in them beyond what they can do for you in terms of paid work. And it's helpful to read regularly, good writers and writers who are doing it for a living. The most important thing, though, is to file clean copy on time. That's the most important thing. So, you're writing something, and it's often you've not got very much time to do it in, and it's easy, to hand in something that's a bit drafty. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you can edit your own work before you submit, because you're trying to make sure the editor has. Ideally, the editor doesn't have to spend much time at all on your piece. So it needs to be, all the standard stuff, but it needs to be, you make sure that you've read it through, make sure that there's any kind of superfluous stuff in there is out, make sure that make sure that it's properly set out, so that it's grammatically correct, and you've done spell check and all that kind of thing. Because no one wants no one's going to want to spend loads of time on copy when it comes in, because they need it to be out. Similarly, if you can't do something on time, then let them know well in advance that you're not going to be able to do it on time. They'll know and be fine about it, but you don't want them chasing you up about something. And then, if you actually get your pitch through, and you've got to think about structuring it, the main question that I have in mind when I'm writing them is, why should your reader care? Why should anybody care what I think? Why is my opinion, worth listening to where other people's aren't? Well, actually, it's probably not, to be honest. I mean, it's not like I've innately got something more important to say than anybody else. Of course I haven't. But there are some subjects that I've studied and that I've got qualifications in, and that I've researched for years, and they are things that I know what I think about, and I know what the evidence is on them, and I keep up to date with those subjects. So you've got to know your own mind, really, because when you're giving your pitch, you're not just going to say, like, I want to write on Amber Heard and Johnny Depp. You're going to give a very particular, specific take on that. And the editor isn't necessarily going to give that to you. You've got to give it to them, and then that's got to stand out amongst all the other people who are wanting to write on Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, and there'll be loads. So make sure you know what you're talking about. Make sure you know why you should be writing it, because if you can't articulate it, then the reader isn't going to know either, and they're not going to, it probably won't get through even to commission. Think very carefully about your opening sentence. So I would avoid most of the time, not all of the time, but most of the time, I would avoid just rehashing the story. So I would avoid, doing that kind of standard, in from April to May 2022, Amber Heard and Johnny Depp were in a court, tangle. Instead, have something unexpected as your opening sentence. Have something that might recall your experience of something, or something that grabs attention. Because often, if somebody's reading it, then they already know that they're already interested in that area. So they already know something, they'll already know that there's a court case going, well, there was a court case going on. So you don't need to retell them that information. The only time that's been different is if I've written something on a subject that's very serious. And if it's a subject that's really serious and the editor has said, we want a very serious tone to this piece, then I will write something kind of more standard and traditional as an opening. If not, I'll just go with whatever comes into my head for the opening line. It's nice though, if when you get to your conclusion, you can tie up with the opening. So it's nice if you can, so for example, if you open with saying, I don't know, I was on a beach and I saw this, then it's nice if at the end, in the conclusion, you can return to that kind of, that kind of description or metaphor or whatever. It just adds a kind of circular sort of feel that feels like there's a proper ending. So some people might say that, for opinion pieces, you need a call to action at the end. That's fine, and if you feel really passionately about something, or the reason why you're writing something is because you're a member of a particular group or whatever, or, you run your own group, then that's great. But sometimes, national newspapers perhaps won't want you to be advertising, for like petitions or, various things online. So that can be difficult to do. So I always think of what feels like it's an ending, and often conclusions are the things that I take the longest over, because I kind of know when I feel like it's ended, and it doesn't feel right when I've just got the wrong sentence at the end. So conclusions can be frustrating, but I would always say, think about how you started when you end, and try and echo some of that in the end. Now, this is one of the main issues about opinion pieces, because you've got to say why you should be writing something, and you've got to say why you're the right person to be writing it, and why you're an expert on it or whatever. Often that might be because you've got personal experience in something. And if you've got personal experience in something, it means that it might be something that's quite traumatic. It might be something that actually, not many people know about. And so do you really want to expose that bit of yourself for, what, 100 quid, 150 quid, 200 quid? I don't know. Some people are much more comfortable with that than other people. It might be that you feel comfortable with it until there's a response. The responses, it's not so much the writing and the publishing, it's the responses that can make you feel exposed and vulnerable if you're not prepared for them. And, people aren't that kind to opinion piece writers. The independent voices, I know that they actually stop comments for particular writers who get loads of vitriol, because, particularly if you're a woman, or, you're a person of colour, or, you're from a minority group, then unfortunately you are more likely to get a load of awful responses. And the comments section is never a pretty place. Now, personally, I don't read the comments section. It doesn't help me writing. It doesn't help my sense of stuff. There is no benefit for me to read in the comment section. But some people do, they read every one. Now, it's not, to me, the comment section isn't constructive feedback. You know, it's not like somebody's taking track changes to your work. Like, the comment section can be awful. It can be like a cesspit, basically. But some people do read the comment like that. You know, I'll have friends who'll go, oh, they'll text me and say, have you seen what such and such has said on your latest piece? They've said that you're such and such. And I think, yeah, I feel like I don't need to know that. They're a stranger. You know, at the end of the day, whatever I write, the people who love me will still love me. I'll still love the people I love. What some stranger set has got to say about one piece that I wrote in 2 hours, it's not going to really make that much difference to my life. But it's taken me a while to get to that point. I think when I very first started writing, which was a few years ago, I got really, you know, I just, some of the responses that I got were just, they'd ruined my day. You know, they'd actually made me feel quite sick, because people can be really nasty, you know. And the thing is, very often, we've got to bear in mind is they're not talking about, they don't know you. They don't know you. And you're not a person to them. All they know is what you've written. And so they are talking about what you've written, but sometimes they can get personal and they can comment on appearance, or they can say stuff about, you know, your family or whatever. I've had people write to me, you know, on Twitter and stuff and say that my husband should divorce me. Things, you know, just daft things like that. And, you know, and it sounds daft now, but it can feel at the time like, you know, you can feel quite attacked, and it can be very intrusive. What I've learned is I just don't let those people into my life. So no one's owed a response. Just because somebody comments on what you've written doesn't mean that you've got to respond to them. Doesn't matter. It's not about being polite. You don't need to be polite to a complete stranger who's decided to, you know, make some sort of comment. And access to you is a privilege. Just because you've put one idea out there and that's what you do for a living, doesn't mean that total strangers have got, you know, access to your every thought and that they get to have a conversation with you. You get to decide who takes your time up. And if you don't think they're worth your time, just don't do it. Doesn't matter. I very, 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 very rarely respond to comments on social media or anything like that, because frankly, there's not enough time in my life. I don't know when my life will end, but I know that there isn't enough time to write back to people who are barn pots. So the whole point is to create conversation. Very often, you know, I mean, anything is controversial really, and especially if you've got a strong opinion about it. You've probably been commissioned because you've got a kind of more unusual take on something. So by nature then, that's going to be controversial. And some people just will not like what you've got to say, and they're going to tell you, and they might even be nasty about it. I don't block on Twitter or social media, because from what I've seen, that can become a bit of a kind of badge of honor, you know, and it can kind of keep it can kind of keep that conversation going a bit longer. So, you know, like, oh, she blocked me because I said this. So, whereas actually I do the mute button, so I can't see what they're saying, but they don't know that I've done that. So it's just like they're speaking into the ether. Just it's not making any difference. I would say beware of the sea lions. They are the people who will try and take your time up by pretending to be polite and asking questions. And quite often they start a question with genuine question. And then, you know, you've got somebody most likely who's a bit of a sea lion. And they pretend to be really polite, and they're pretending that actually they just want you to give more evidence, but really they're just taking your time up. And it's just a kind of, it's a more sophisticated form of trolling, really. So I'd say don't feel like because you've put something out there that that means that, you know, if you've been paid 100 quid, 150 quid, you know, whatever you've been paid, it's not enough to have to deal with Burks online. Be thoughtful though about your family and friends, because just because you feel comfortable in something going out there, are you prepared for the responses you might get? So I, for example, about a year ago, I wrote about infertility and about my own experiences of miscarriage. And, you know, that's my experience and I own it. But my mum was quite upset about it. And she really felt like, she wasn't upset because, you know, she thinks there's anything wrong in it, but she was upset because I think she felt uncomfortable that like those feelings and that experience was out there for people who aren't going to take care with it. You know, it's not valuable to some people. It doesn't mean anything. And equally, you know, I've written on things that aren't even about personal experience, but then people have been really personal in response. So I wrote about, you know, when there was this the like epidemic of spiking in nightclubs and stuff, and I wrote about that. And then I got some really awful responses from people on social media who were basically just like, well, they were sending kind of you know, threats and things, and I found that bizarre. But I've also come to realize that you don't know what is going to set people off. It can sometimes, you can write the thing that you think is the most controversial thing and think, oh God, I'm going to really get some responses, and you don't really get any. Alternatively, you can write something that you think is quite benign and you can really get hammered for it. So you don't really know. So you've got to be prepared, and you've got to have, you know, you've got to have your barriers in place and your boundaries in place. And you've got to decide, is this something that you really want to talk about? If it's just because you want a commission and because you need a couple $100 quid, I wouldn't, you know. I've been really skint, and it's never a good idea to put anything out there that you feel even a bit unsure about. You've got to be sure that that's something, that's a story you want to be told, and it's something that you've got to be prepared. If people around you who are close to you aren't comfortable with it, then you've got to know that you've still done the right thing by you, even if they're not happy with it. It might also be that you get media requests from stuff that you've written. So I wrote something about quiet quitting and got a media request from this like news program in the US that's got a really big kind of audience. And, you know, I decided I wasn't going to do it because I had a funny feeling that they were going to try and it was going to be like a really combative, like adversarial kind of interview. And so I just thought, I don't fancy it, to be honest. I've said what I've got to say about it in that opinion piece. I'm not really fussed about commenting again. However, when it was Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, I did feel really strongly about that. And so when I got media requests, I did most of them because it was something that I just felt like, you know, I feel strongly about it. I've got more to say on it than I've already said. So you do have to think very carefully. On the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp thing, that's where I say die-hard fans. It's not like fans who are like Bruce Willis fans. It's fans who will do anything to support or defend, in their eyes, their icon. And turns out Johnny Depp fits into that category. And, you know, again, I got a lot of negative response from quite a lot of people for the stuff that I said, but I was all right with it, to be honest, because I believed in what I was saying. So that makes a big difference. If you're just writing something with an angle because, you know, you want a commission and you get a bad response, that don't feel so good. That's really not so nice. So you do have to kind of keep your integrity intact while you're doing it. Right, I think we've just got to the end of the 45 minutes. So does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I can help with marshalling them in the chat, if that makes any sense. If you have particular questions, you can pop them in the chat. In the meantime, we have loads of questions that people have sent in advance that I can ask you through as well, if that works. Okay. I mean, first of all, why are they called sea lions? But we can maybe get to that at a different point. Yeah. We had a lot of people actually asking about the point that you really made around, is it really worth selling your story for a couple of hundred? Yeah. And how you avoid kind of finding yourself in that kind of potentially exploitative like situation, I guess. Yeah. So I don't know if there was anything more you could elaborate on that to kind of help people with potentially.
Yeah, I think the main thing is that you choose who you would write that for. So you know, you've got to be sure that it's a publication that you think would publish it responsibly. It's one that you would do that, I think, with an editor you've made a relationship with, so that you know that they're not gonna. I once got some advice from a journalist who'd been in the trade for years and years and years, as a friend of mine. And he said to me, he was talking to me about pitching stuff. And he said to me, you know, you might want to pitch to, and then name this like quite right-wing publication. And I said, oh, I'm not sure that they'd publish my stuff. I was really surprised that he mentioned it. And he said, oh yeah, no, they might well publish it, because sometimes they like to set up a kind of, you know, straw man for a fall. So they'll post something, they'll publish something that then they know will get a backlash, because then, you know, they get readership, they get loads of conversation. And I thought, yeah, that's why you've got to be really careful. You can't just go with the commission and who's going to print the stuff. You've got to be really careful about identifying who will be responsible with something that's close to you. And if you're not sure and you don't know that there will be, just don't do it. Just don't put it out there. And to be honest, if you've got any question, any worry at all, just don't put it out there. Yeah. I think that's the main thing. Emma Barnett was she did a piece after she wrote about going through infertility treatment, IVF, and she was saying that after she wrote it, because the other thing is you get a lot of nice stuff as well, but you do get a lot of people who write to you and talk about their experiences, and sometimes it can be really heartbreaking, and you can get quite a lot of it. And you know, there's also I don't want to sound like too pretentious or whatever, but you know, there is some emotional labor in reading those as well, and because they are the ones you do feel like you've got to respond to. And so, you know, just think about not just the writing of it, but think about the reception of it, and also, you know, where you feel like your responsibility ends once it's out there in publication. Do you feel like you've got to write to people on Twitter about it? Do you feel like you've got to do follow-up interviews? Do you feel like you've got to write to people who've had a similar experience or worse? You know, that there's a whole kind of context around it that I certainly wasn't aware of until I put something out there. Yeah, so just be responsible for yourself in the first place, and make sure that you're not trusting strangers to do right by you, because they might not.
Yeah, and that's especially quite a dilemma if you're quite new to the business, or you're kind of new to the area, or you know, that particular work. Do you have any kind of other tips for people who are quite early in their journalism career, potentially, who either want to get into kind of op-ed writing, or you know, watch outs that they might need to be aware of as well?
I think the main thing when you first start is you just got to pitch, and you've got to nail the structure of the pitches. So you've got to make sure, and often, you know, it's the headline. I'm talking about responses. Quite a lot of the responses that you get are people who've just read a headline and they haven't actually read your article. And that's because in most cases, you know, the writer doesn't write the headline, an editor writes it. So very often you've had no input into the headline. So, you know, you get attached loads of times articles have come up and I've not even known that they were my writing, because I just didn't kind of recognize the headline. I didn't recognize it as necessarily reflective of something that I'd written. But that's, you know, them's the breaks. Now I'm sure, you know, if you've got a decent relationship and it's a responsible publication, you can change the headline if you want to. But you've also got to be prepared that will happen, and that people do respond without reading, and they do respond on social media without really knowing what you've said. So I'd say be prepared for that, and just make sure that you're pitching as much as possible, because at some point something will get through if you're pitching, if you're saying why it's important and you've got a strong idea for it. It could be that, you know, if editors have got writers that they know submit decent work and it's, you know, clean copy and they do it on time and they're reliable, it could be, you know, that you've just got to kind of make your name with them as one of those people. So again, if you're starting out, I would say either create a personal website or get yourself on Medium or Substack or one of those outlets and do your own portfolio where you can make sure you can send it to people, because it's unlikely, unless you've got a really, really compelling reason why you're the best person to write about something. If it's just that you're pitching on different ideas every day, then you're probably not going to get commissioned without some evidence of what your writing's like and how you write and what your style's like. So you need to create that for editors to see. And I think in the first instance, when you're starting out, you've got to set your shop window up, and that's your portfolio and your website.
One of the other questions that we get actually quite often in, you know, when we do kind of sessions around this is whether or not you feel you should kind of secure those contacts or potential quotes kind of as you're pitching the piece, or whether you should be kind of, you know, pitching that outright and hoping to tidy it up afterwards, I guess.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Now, I don't get them in advance, but mainly for the areas that I write on, it's because I already know people. So you know, I can just text them and say, can you give me a quote on this? So that's quite handy. In an op-ed, you're less likely to need loads of expert quotes. You know, it's not like an investigative piece or a features piece. So you're not in quite the same situation. If you had a features piece or an investigative piece and you want to show that, you know, you've already got them in place and, you know, so that it's definitely going to happen. For an op-ed, it's very unlikely that a pitch or a commission will hang on that. So I wouldn't worry about that at pitching point. I'd worry about that after you've got the commission.
One of the other questions that we had from people who, you know, were sending in questions as they bought their tickets, going back to kind of that structure kind of conversation, there was a lot of questions about kind of how much room you should allow for almost the other side of the argument.
Yeah.
You know, if you're trying to persuade someone on your case, how much should you be acknowledging other pieces, or even acknowledging kind of doubt in your own argument, I guess, when you're kind of putting together one of those pieces?
Yeah, I do that all the time. So what I tend to do, my kind of rhetorical flourish, is that I will have that conversation in the piece. So it's as if I've got somebody who's reading it is asking me the question. So I'll say, like, you know, what a load of pseudo-intellectual crap I hear you say. Well, and, you know, I'll answer that. And so that's what I do. So I do that in the piece. I acknowledge that the kind of questions that I'm, you know, that I know have been asked loads on Twitter, or, you know, the kind of opposing idea that I know is getting loads of traction. I'll answer it in the piece, but in a way that still kind of strengthens my own argument. So I rarely do a kind of, you know, there's this side and there's this side, and, you know, maybe this way is the best. I always start with quite a strong position, and sometimes that changes, you know, but that's good, because your thoughts should change. You should progress. I mean, no one wants to be thinking exactly the same thing all the life. But then, sometimes that gives you another piece, because you can say, I thought this, but actually now I know I was wrong, and now I think this. So then you've got a new piece out of it. But I do answer opposing arguments within the piece, and I do it quite self-consciously, and I do it as if I'm in conversation with the reader. That's how I do it. You don't have to do it like that, but I just find that useful, because it's like, as I'm writing it, I get the question and I'm like, oh, I think that, do you? Yes, and respond.
Because you may well be coming up with or coming across those kind of arguments as you're researching.
Or even thinking them yourself, But no, what's this?
We still have plenty of time for questions in the chat. If you want to add them in yourselves, Amy, we really appreciate your thoughts that you put in around protecting yourself, very much backing up, Katie, what you were kind of saying previously. One of the other questions we had come in was around how you find the right outlet to pitch if kind of nothing you've read or found really kind of aligns with your argument. If you've got an idea for something but you don't quite know where it would fit from that perspective.
Yeah, I think it's probably quite good if you've not found anything that aligns with your argument, because that means you've got something unusual, and that's, commission editors don't just want people who say the same thing. So you probably more likely, and also, the amount of publications that are out there are loads. So there's going to be somewhere where your voice will fit. Somewhere like, I write a fair bit for Independent Voices, and what I like about them is that they do publish all kinds of stuff. So, for example, they'll go with quite some, quite conservative stuff, but then they'll also go with some really left-wing stuff. And so, there are places where there is kind of more of a, where you do have more perspectives on offer. But again, I would be careful of I would be careful of trying my luck with places where you really think that that you don't match up. Because again, I always have that worry in my head about what my friend said to me when they said, sometimes you'll get a commission from places where you're not a natural fit, and there might be a reason for that. And I'm not keen on being that one. So so just be careful. But if you can't find any, if you think that your argument, you can't find it anywhere, that's a good thing.
Yeah. And how do you feel kind of confident in your opinion if you're not necessarily an expert or the world's leading expert on that particular subject, without then potentially oversharing on your kind of life experiences?
Yeah. Well, you don't have to be the world's greatest expert, but you do have to know something about it. And especially at the point where you're building relationships with editors, then there's got to be some reason why they think you're going to be better at writing something than their kind of go-to in-house person. So you are going to have to, your initial pitches are going to have to be on something that you know about really well for some reason. You don't have to ever write anything, from about your own life. I do, but then I'm more comfortable with that. I wouldn't have done that in the past. So it's quite difficult, because you kind of do have to, you don't have to be the world's leading expert, but you do have to know it. You have to know the subject you're talking about. But then later on, as you get more established and you get better relationships, it might be that, your editors start to get in touch with you and say, can you write on this? But then, you've got to be really honest and say, no, if you can't. I had one the other day where I had to say, no idea about it. Because, they're the ones that really bite you on the arse at the end. I mean, I wrote a piece about a year ago now, and it was awkward. It was awkward. I was absolutely skinned, and I just really needed some cash dead quick. So this editor wrote to me and said, can you write on this subject? And I was like, I knew nothing. In fact, I'll go as far as saying I knew less than nothing. about it. But, you know, I knew how to structure a piece. So I was like, great, cracking, I'll do it. I wrote this piece that I just thought, like, who's going to even care? You know, nobody's going to read it. It's going to sing. I'll get paid. It's fine. So, you know, really having a moment of strong integrity there, guys. And discovered that actually that's the most read piece I've ever done. And it has haunted me ever since. And I got such a backlash on it. And, you know, it wasn't like a backlash as in, you know, when you get something and people just being horrible to you for no reason. It was a backlash on people who know better than I do about something that I'd written on where I just got no business opening the gob about. So that felt like one of those cases where it wasn't the best choice to do it, because you just don't know. You don't know what's going to get popular. You don't know what's going to go viral. You don't know what's going to go on what forum. You don't know what's going to get tweeted by a celebrity. You just don't know. So I would be very, very careful about writing on anything that you don't feel 100% confident in what you're saying. Somebody's going to disagree with anything you write, but that's not the point. You've got to believe what you're writing. If you don't, you'll come unstuck, like me.
And it'll haunt you forever.
It will haunt you for the rest of your days.
And finally, a quick last question in the chat about potentially pitching. Yeah, should you be kind of aiming to maybe pitch to kind of less competitive magazines or newspapers if you're kind of just starting out, or you haven't seen their, you know, them particularly write about those kind of pieces? Does that give you maybe a bit of an advantage compared to the, you know, where everyone else is pitching?
I would always look at the kind of thing that publications take, you know, and sometimes they've got really helpful like pitching submission outline or guidelines, and they'll kind of tell you what stories have done the best. So they often kind of tell you exactly what they're looking for. Or when a new commissioning editor starts, they'll tell you exactly what areas they're looking for. I wouldn't, you know, just aim low just because you're just starting out. I mean, my first article came out in the Telegraph, and the second one came out in the Guardian. You know, and they got a lot of readership, and that kind of allowed me, really, I think, to get into other publications later on. So I wouldn't start low. I think if you know what you're talking about and you've got an interesting angle on it, then just send it to the editor. I mean, what have you got to lose anyway? I mean, what's going to happen? They might not respond. Well, there you go. That'll happen a billion times in your career.
Good advice all round. Well, thank you very much, Katie, for your time today. And thank you very much for everyone who joined us. You could have got this talk for free if you were a JR member. You can find details of that on the website.